You can drive into a new construction neighborhood with your game face on. You have all your points ready and a mind to negotiate. It doesn't matter how much research you've done or how prepared you are, some home builders are just not going to negotiate with you. But wouldn't it be nice to know in advance which ones will? Well, I think so. So let's talk about it. Well, hello, this is Wendy Pinnell, and one way to figure out if a new construction builder might be a motivated seller is by evaluating the builder's exposure. For example, if they've just gotten started and they've put a lot of money into the project without having any return on investment yet, they probably need to make some sales. Something to look for is if they're being aggressive in their first phase of construction. Like if you notice there are a lot of inventory homes going up, it could mean they're really pushing for early sales. They've chosen not to wait on the 8 to 10 month process of closing a new build to begin recouping their investment. They're putting up those inventory homes to convert them into a faster paycheck. The thing is, while they're putting all that inventory out, they're also increasing their exposure. Now, keep in mind, during this initial phase, the development looks nothing more than just a giant field of dirt and mud. I mean, it doesn't even remotely resemble a neighborhood yet. So it's gonna take a buyer with vision to even consider a neighborhood like that, and the builder knows that. And here's the thing, there are literally hundreds of communities in this exact phase. Like one that comes to mind is Deer Creek Ranch in Fort Worth. Okay, they're building a ton of inventory homes in a community that otherwise looks like a big brown field, okay? They need to recoup their cash, and it's going to take a leap of faith from you as the buyer for them to do that. As you're evaluating exposure, another thing to consider is whether it's a large or small development. Let's say you're looking at like North Creek in McKinney, for example, okay? This is an example of a small development. With K. Hovnanian as the only builder in just a few streets, they're controlling the release of the lots and they're limiting their exposure. In a situation like this, the builder might not be as motivated to sell quickly compared to a larger development with more inventory. Now, Deer Creek Ranch has more exposure here than North Creek, and we could expect a more cooperative seller. Now, second sign you want to be looking for is inventory on the ground. Now, keep in mind, the minute a home is ready, the seller wants it off their books. They need to get their money out of it. When you're thinking about inventory on the ground, keep in mind this could happen towards the beginning phase of construction, okay, like we were just talking about, but really it can happen anytime. So this is something key I really want you to remember. When it comes to negotiating, your best deals are always going to be with inventory. So you want to look at foreclosures? Absolutely, let's go look at foreclosures. But also keep in mind, sometimes you can get an even better deal just by working with a motivated builder who has a ton of inventory on the ground. So how much inventory do they have on the ground, and how long has that inventory been sitting there? Well, a quick look at the MLS is going to tell you those days on the market. I mean, honestly, you would be astounded at how much data we can collect about builders just by accessing the MLS, with the catch, of course, being that you're going to need a realtor to access that data. So we see a lot of inventory on the ground, but how much more is on the way? Do you see dozens of inventory homes plus a ton more under construction? Or do they have just a handful of inventory homes left and this is their closeout? In that situation, you could expect to run into a completely different negotiating landscape with a builder, who's already made a lot of their profit and just has a few left. So are you catching by now how much exposure plays a role in motivating our builder? Oh, and here's an even bigger motivator when it comes to inventory. The longer an inventory home sits on the ground, the more likely the taxable value will convert from land value to land plus improvement. So if a home sells when it's still just land value, okay, we're talking maybe like $4,000 in taxes, right? However, after it converts to land plus improvement, okay, and what I mean by that is it's not just a square of dirt, but rather, it has a beautiful home, and landscaping, and a fence, okay? When it does that conversion, it could jump like $30,000 in taxes. Now, that conversion typically becomes material around like October to November when the tax bills are released, and then those tax bills are actually due by February 1st. So depending on the time of the year, you could mention this during negotiations. Hey, Mr. Builder, how you feeling about that tax bill coming up on this one? So the savvy builder is going to want to unload their inventory before that value conversion happens. And of course, history is one of your biggest indicators on how all of these inventory variables are affecting our builder. Like, you want to find out if the builder has already been accepting lower offers, and if so, how low have they been willing to come down in price? Texas is a non-disclosure state. And what that means is you're not going to be able to find out what prices these builders have been accepting on your own. That information is not available for you. Now, I once had a buyer tell me, Wendy, I'm a researcher. I can find these homes on my own. I'm in sales, so I know how to negotiate. Why do I need a realtor? Well, good question. How do you know what to negotiate to? Sometimes these homes are literally overpriced by $100,000 and more. If you're a great negotiator and you talk them down $80,000, that is awesome. What a feeling of accomplishment. Unfortunately, even with your negotiating prowess, you've just overpaid. You're upside down. You owe more on your home than it's worth, because even if you're a great negotiator, you just didn't have the information you need. So once again, you're going to need a realtor to access that information. And speaking of which, if we sound like the right person for the job, you're definitely going to want to check out our Let's Find Home questionnaire that you can find in the description section. Another way to tell if a new construction builder might be motivated is by paying attention to certain market triggers that could signal they're headed into economic uncertainty or a period of lower demand. Okay, so first let's talk about economic news. For example, if the Fed has just announced that they will be raising rates again, this can create a sense of uncertainty in the housing market. In this case, builders may be more motivated to sell, and you could mention that rate hike during negotiations to strengthen your position. One key thing is to strike while the iron is hot here, okay? Is you're after an uncertainty, and to a degree, that's an emotional response. Now, another factor to consider is seasonality. Is the season about to slow down? Builders might start to worry if they have a lot of inventory on the ground as they head into the fall. And as we all know, spring and summer are typically considered that hot market, right, with high demand for homes, while fall and winter are going to see a colder market with lower demand. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, okay, this is important, is that you need to know that during the fall and winter months, production will also slow down, okay? And that means that inventory will gradually decline. So if you're after a good deal and you don't mind there being less to choose from, fall and winter may be the perfect time for you. By the time winter rolls around, there will likely be the smallest amount of inventory available. This is where you might be able to get an amazing deal, as builders are going to be a lot more eager to sell before those tax bills come due, okay? Remember those tax bills that are due on February 1st. So you're looking for those market triggers, right? Economic news and seasonal shifts, and you want to use them to your advantage. Another way to tell if a new construction builder might be a motivated seller is by looking for situations where there are several builders within the same development competing with one another. Keep in mind, this strategy is not going to work if they're on closeout. Okay, so you've got to be looking for inventory with all of these builders. Now, to determine whether this competition is driving prices down, and once again, you're going to need your trusty realtor to check market sales. Are the builders lowering their prices in response to each other? Additionally, you're going to want to see if one builder is coming down in price more than the others. Remember, what you're looking for here is a large development with multiple builders, all with inventory to sell. An excellent example of this, okay, was a sale we once negotiated in Midlothian at Villas of Summercrest. Okay, both Grand and Perry homes had offices there, and they were right across the street from each other. Okay, so what we did, we literally went back and forth across that street. It was like 90 degrees out, okay? We did this for hours, walking out of one office, going across the street to the other, while the sales consultants could watch us do it. And by observing their responses, we were able to gauge that both builders were motivated to sell. We ended up getting a fabulous deal for our buyers. So what you're after here is not a North Creek in McKinney, where it's small and there's only one builder, but rather an M3 ranch in Mansfield, where there are 4 builders and their offices are literally all within sight of each other. We've talked about ways to spot the motivated builder, but you also need to know how to spot the unmotivated builder. You do not want to waste your time and energy or even fall in love with a gorgeous home only to run into a stubbornly inflexible seller. So what are those kinds of situations? Well, first of all, scarcity is a fact, and we need to acknowledge that. Okay, if the builder has more demand than homes, they're going to know that, and sometimes they'll even raise their prices when that happens. So when might that happen? Well, it could be when an area is in high demand and growing very rapidly, or when an area is reasonably affordable with excellent schools and great amenities at a low monthly cost. Okay, for example, the Mosaic subdivision in Salina comes to mind. Salina is exploding in growth with a lot of demand. Part of Salina is in Prosper ISD, which is an amazing school district. They're in Denton County, which has some of the lowest property taxes around, and they're going to have fantastic amenities, including like a beautiful pool and lazy river. Now that area is in its preliminary phases where they're not quite accepting contracts yet, but when they are, I suspect there's gonna be enough demand that builders aren't going to give us those reduced prices we'd like to see. Now, the second situation you run into is when you do it to yourself. Okay, and I realize that probably sounds weird, so let me explain. When a buyer limits their options too much, they're creating a scarcity that benefits the builder. Here are some examples. You want one very specific school district and you will not consider any other. Or you have a limited commute and you can't be flexible with your commute time. You have to realize the more narrow an area you're willing to consider, the less successful you can expect to be. Okay, you're narrowing your own options, and maybe it's in an area with a ton of selection, which would be great, but then again, maybe it's not. Ideally, it's great when a buyer can cast a wide net, but sometimes that realistically is not possible. And that's okay, You just need to know that you may not have that negotiating edge. If you want that area bad enough, you may have to accept whatever incentives they're offering. We see this happening with buyers, who fall in love with a particular neighborhood, or they have family there, or they need a very specific school district, and there are only a few lots left. We are going to negotiate with every tool we have in our arsenal, but just know our efforts in these situations probably are not going to be as successful. And speaking of negotiation tools, there's no reason those need to be kept secret. We created an entire video with our top secret negotiating hacks that you can view right here. In the meantime, Wendy out.